So, imagine being told that your uterus is on a joyride up and down your body, and that is the reason why you're upset, or sad, or whatever actually. Welcome to the bizarre world of female hysteria. Let's get into it.
Morbid history.
For centuries, hysteria was a catch-all diagnosis for women who dared to express anything resembling emotion, ambition, or even, of course, dissatisfaction. So yeah, feeling anxious? Hysteria. Bored? Definitely hysteria. Expressing any opinions that weren't pre-approved by society? Well, now you're just being very difficult. But how did this absurd idea take root? What did doctors think caused it? And more importantly, how did they try to cure it? Spoiler alert, the treatments were as ridiculous as the diagnosis itself. So let's dive into a world of wandering wombs, fainting couches, and vibrators disguised as medical equipment. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Hippocrates and his wandering wombs. So, of course, let's start where many stories start, the very beginning. The idea of the diagnosis as it is, hysteria, actually dates back to ancient Greece. The word itself originates from the Greek term hystera, meaning uterus. Doctors like Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, believed that women's emotional and physical issues were caused by their wombs wandering aimlessly around their bodies. Yes, you did absolutely hear that right. Wandering womb syndrome. Apparently, your uterus could drift up to your throat, even to your head, or just stay around your chest, and causing all sorts of mayhem, of course, along the way. Why? Well, the uterus was very dismayed with its lack of bebés growing inside of the afflicted woman. Of course. Their solution? You would lure the uterus back into place with pleasant smells applied to the lower body or the entrance into the female hoo-ha. They thought that the uterus really enjoyed good smells, so if you had something that smelled good down there, they would travel their way back again. Or, on the other hand, you could take some very foul smells and make the lady sniff it. And these foul odors would also force the uterus down back into its natural position. And honestly, I don't know what sounds worse, the diagnosis or the cures. But, of course, the Greeks weren't the only ones perpetrating this nonsense. The wandering womb theory persisted through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and even into the Enlightenment. It became a very convenient way to dismiss any odd behavior that didn't conform to the very strict societal norms placed upon women. Feeling slightly unhappy with your role as an obedient little wife? Don't worry, dear. It's just your uterus acting up again. Off to the loony bin you go! Yay! Hysteria in the Victorian era. So now Let's fast forward to the 19th century or the 1800s, and hysteria had become a full-blown cultural epidemic, and of course, it only affected sensitive, delicate women. Victorian doctors believed that women were biologically predisposed to mental and emotional instability because of their delicate nervous systems and, as you can guess, also their reproductive organs. They had something to do with that, too. By this time, hysteria had evolved into a sort of medical umbrella term. Symptoms ranged from anxiety, the big sad, irritability, to just headaches, fainting, some hanky-panky frustration. Essentially, if a woman expressed any dissatisfaction or even deviated from any societal expectations, such as not feeling an unwavering contentment with just sitting around and drawing small birds, or the absolute fine pastime of playing the pianoforte off-key to your, I'm sure, happy relatives. Showing any kind of discontent to being that delicate little flower, embroidering and just reading, but not too much reading, of course, because novels, that also no good. Either way, she was at great risk of being labeled hysterical. Interestingly, hysteria was kinda limited to middle class and upper class women. Working class women were often ignored altogether, with their struggles attributed to laziness or just moral failings instead. Hysteria was very much a diagnosis of privilege, a reflection of how society perceived women's roles at every level. I mean, there wasn't much a woman needed to do to land herself this label of hysteria. It could be as easy as your significant other being bored with you and claiming you were hysterical and unable to just properly work as a wife. You would be sent off and he could just frolic through life without you. One case told of a woman actually even being flung into an asylum simply for having different religious beliefs than her husband. And as said, sudden pangs of emotion, depression, anxiety, all of these were causes enough to merit this diagnosis of hysteria. It's very easy to just laugh at the extreme absurdity of this belief that destroyed so many women's lives just by people actually believing that a womb was on the loose inside of their bodies. But we should not forget that this actually caused extreme and real harm and trauma to the women who were accused. The very bizarre treatments for hysteria. Now this is where things get even more ridiculous and bizarre. Let's talk about the so-called cures for this hysteria. Number 1. Pelvic massage and the birth of the vibrator. One of the most infamous treatments for hysteria was indeed a pelvic massage. Victorian doctors believed that hysteria was caused by an excess of sexual energy, or even congestion of the womb, and their solution, a literal manual massage performed by the doctor to induce what they called a hysterical paroxysm, better known today as an orgasm. But hold your horses. No one saw this as anything sexual at all. No, this was purely medical, and the doctors treated it as such with all kinds of seriousness, I could assume. And the problem here, well, many doctors found the process tedious and time-consuming. So enter the invention of the vibrator. Initially, this was designed as a medical device to save doctors from hand cramps. Early models were massive machines, powered by steam or electricity, and was marketed as legitimate medical equipment. Imagine walking into your doctor's office and seeing one of those contraptions waiting for you. Simply terrifying, I know. Or maybe heaven is a place vaguely resembling a hospital. Cure number 2. The rest cure. Isolation and idleness. For women whose hysteria was deemed too severe even to be helped by massage therapy, doctors would prescribe rest cure. This involved confining women to their beds for weeks or even months, forbidding them from any physical or intellectual activity, no books, no social visits, nothing but just lying there and eating bland food, so that nothing could stir up those pesky nerves of yours. In 1892, a novel called The Yellow Wallpaper came out, and it revolves around a woman whose husband imposes such a cure on her by locking her in a room where she then slowly descends into madness from having nothing better to do than stare at what is apparently a very aggressively yellow wallpaper. This rest cure actually often led to the women in a worse shape than before, exacerbating their already pretty fragile mental health. So, not a very good treatment. But when was ever total isolation with bland food even ever a good thing for one's mental health? And then, of course, number 3, and our last one. Hysterectomy, the surgical solution. So yeah, in very extreme cases, doctors believed that the ultimate cure for hysteria was to simply remove this offending organ, the pesky, wandering uterus. Hysterectomies were often performed without the patient's full understanding or even consent, and the procedure was highly invasive and dangerous by today's standards. But as you can already tell, the logic behind this horrifyingly solution was pretty simple. If the uterus was causing the problem, just get rid of it! And of course, it goes without saying that these surgeries left women physically and emotionally scarred, traumatized, all in the name of curing a condition that didn't actually even exist. Bravo! The hysteria diagnosis finally began to fade out. Thankfully, hecking thanks, well, early in the 20th century, thanks to the rise of psychoanalysis and psychological, things, they were going ahead, full steam ahead. Sigmund Freud argued that hysteria wasn't caused by a wandering womb at all, but by unresolved psychological trauma. While Freud's theories weren't perfect, they did mark a shift towards understanding mental health as something separate from gender and biology. And finally, by the 1950s, hysteria was no longer a recognized medical diagnosis. Kinda late, if you ask me, but here we are. But the legacy of dismissing women's health concerns didn't disappear. Even today, studies show that women's symptoms are more likely to be downplayed or misdiagnosed than men's, often labeled as stress or anxiety instead of taken seriously. Sadly, history just keeps on repeating itself, but without the vibrating massages. Sad. Either way, what do you think about this strange chapter in medical history? Share your thoughts down below, I'd love to hear them. And also, of course, stay amazing, stay hydrated, and most of all, stay morbid, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye!